I was totally wrong. Because this is the best gaming handheld ever.
MSI Claw, the best gaming handheld ever. Huh? Oh, that was such a nice dream.
Well, I wish I could say that I was wrong with considering this brand new MSI Claw being dead on arrival. Because I think I wasn't. But probably not alone for the reasons you'd expect. So let's talk about this.
This is Hubwood.
In a market where we already have an ASUS ROG Ally, a Steam Deck, a Lenovo Legion Go, and many other handhelds by smaller companies, MSI decided to throw in an overpriced and kinda underperforming handheld with haptic flaws into the arena. And to repeat my statement from my MSI Thin review like 1 year ago, no, MSI won't send us laptops anymore. No. But to be fair, there's even a handful of good things to say about the MSI Claw. They're just no game changers or helping that much. But first I have to point out that I'm currently reviewing the cheaper MSI Claw version, which comes with the Intel Core Ultra 125H, 16GB of DDR5 RAM and a 512GB SSD. And I'm still waiting for the Core Ultra 7 version, which might arrive by the time this video is published. But since it is mostly identical except for the performance and the SSD, while being even more expensive, it won't change my overall opinion. By the way, I'm planning to compare the faster Claw version, once it arrives, this or next week, against the ASUS ROG Ally, so subscribe right now if you don't want to miss that one. Okay, so this model costs €829 in Europe to date, which would be around $900 if translated directly, while in the US it actually only costs around $700, which though is a lot more than its direct competitor, the ASUS ROG Ally, for which I can get the Z1 Extreme version for €650 brand new right now, while that handheld already did get a lot of updates and improvements. In short, the MSI Claw is very, very similar to the ROG Ally in a lot of ways. Like a clone even. The size and the 120Hz Full HD display are basically identical. And the MSI Claw really even seems to have a variable refresh rate display. I couldn't find any option considering that in the Intel or the MSI menu, but there was no screen tearing and it felt like VRR was active, meaning it is pretty smooth even at lower frame rates. So I guess that's a good thing. The main difference really is that the MSI Claw sports Intel's new Core Ultra 5 and Core Ultra 7 chips with the Arc iGPU we've already seen in some laptops lately. Now the general build quality seems to be okay from what I can tell, except for the LB and the RB buttons. Now how do I put this? I know, they suck ass. They are utter garbage. Now about Hubwood you say, language you say, why these harsh words you say? Well, let me show you what I mean. As my hands are relatively big with thin long fingers, the grip I have on the LB and the RB button is not good. I would either have to bend my fingers like this to click them, if I'm holding it tight, or just hug the buttons like this and try to press the button. Now for the ASUS ROG Ally, or my Xbox controller, that works like a charm. You can hug them and still click them, or you can do it like this. It's very comfortable to use it. But someone at MSI decided that it's a good idea to make these two buttons mushy like triggers. That means I either have to bend my index fingers like this, like I said before, which is uncomfortable and fatiguing, or I'm not able to use them correctly, as by completely hugging these buttons, sometimes they just don't click. I'm trying to show you what I mean by playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where the RB button is for light attacks. So I would have to hold the MSI Claw in sad, uncomfortable way, while it makes the whole button layout feel kinda off. Now on top of that, my RB button also seems to sound different than the LB button and is even less clickable and even more mushy. To be honest, this alone would render this whole device completely useless for me, no matter the performance. That is a deal breaker, definitely. You just cannot download a new button. Yes, hello? I would like to download a new RB button and 16GB of additional RAM. Hello? Hello! And man, I actually really wish I could just end this review right here. Kidding, I'm still here. Considering the other buttons and the button layout itself, it seems to be okay and pretty much identical to the ROG Ally, except the D-pad is also a bit mushy, too mushy for my taste. So in general, some people actually call it a black ROG Ally, which is also more expensive and performing less good. Well, now what I actually do like about the MSI Claw are the speakers. Thanks to the Nahimic software and the preset profile, they sound great. Maybe even a bit better than the stock Ally speakers.
When I was dead asleep. When I was dead asleep.
They got lots of bass, good loudness and a clear sound. Also, they are probably better than on most entry-level MSI gaming laptops. And I also like that in theory the battery capacity is larger than the Ally's with 53 Watt-hours over the Ally's 40 Watt-hours, while the Claw doesn't seem to be heavier in comparison. What I don't like is that we're once more only getting one USB-C port up here, whereas Lenovo showed how to give us two of these. Though, at least thanks to the Intel CPU, the Claw has Thunderbolt support, meaning you could get more performance with an external eGPU. But the fact that even in 2024 we still have to deal with 16 GB of shared RAM on a Windows 11 system with an iGPU and not even get the option to go for 32 GB isn't exactly great. The fan loudness actually is pretty decent on auto mode, while I have to point out that the CPU actually might hit 100 degrees Celsius from time to time that way. The manual fan speed settings allow you to set the two fans to full speed, which is quite loud, but definitely helps to bring down the temperatures. Also, the Claw has multiple performance settings with extreme performance, balanced, super battery and the manual mode. And here we have another big issue. The lowest TDP option for the CPU and the GPU combined is 20 watt, whereas the Ally can go down to 15 or even 10 watt. And that is ridiculous considering MSI's claim that the Claw would get you 50% more battery time, which just isn't true. At least not if you're not only looking at possible idle run times in Windows when doing nothing, where it actually can get around 8 to 10 hours at 50% display brightness thanks to the super low power cores of the Core Ultra 5 125H, and that's not bad actually. But playing Forza Horizon 5 at the super battery saving mode with 20 watt, which actually utilizes more like 30 to 31 watt for the whole system according to the Claw's OSD, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that this won't last that long. To be precise, it lasts around a maximum of 120 minutes, which is even less than on the Legion Go with its 15 watt mode, resulting in 125 minutes. And not 50% more, not even compared to the 40 Watt-hour battery of the ROG Ally. So what gives MSI? And here we have a quick chart in which I compared the performance of the Claw using this 20 watt mode with the ROG Ally and the Legion Go using their 15 watt modes. Now MSI could and should address this in the future with updates. But why release it that way in the first place? That's just going to backfire. And I have to mention that from time to time the power settings didn't seem to work at all, ignoring my inputs and not changing the values, so I had to reboot the device to fix that. By the way, if you're looking for a solution to double your gaming time on your handheld, check out my review of the ASUS 65 watt power bank after this one. Now again, to be fair, ASUS and Lenovo had similar issues in the beginning, so we might at least see an improvement after a while on this topic with updates. I mean software-wise. But it just makes reviewing these unfinished handhelds kinda annoying. By the way, the MSI software for the Claw is pretty basic yet. It is kinda intuitive to use, but it doesn't have all the options people want compared to the ASUS ROG Ally, which could and probably will change with future updates, if MSI isn't immediately losing interest in its new gaming handheld. But right now there are, for example, no quick settings to change the resolution or the display frequency, which I expected to be there. Also, let's have a quick look at the BIOS. If you're attaching a keyboard with the help of a USB hub, you can enter the advanced BIOS, which opens up a vast variety of options comparable to a desktop mainboard BIOS. where you can basically adjust everything at your own risk, of course. So now what about the performance? It scored up to 12,800 points for Cinebench R23 for the multi-core and 1,672 points for the single-core test when using the extreme performance mode. I also tried to fire up PC Mark X, but that just crashed on me every time I tried to do so. So I have no numbers for that at the moment. For gaming, the MSI Claw actually seemed to perform almost identical to the ASUS Swift Go 14 laptop I tested a few weeks ago, which had the same CPU and the same amount of RAM. Back then, we've been hoping that the Claw would perform better, but until today, it doesn't. So if you're interested in a test with 30 games at a 40 watt mode, make sure to watch that video later on. But now, let's have a quick look at a handful of games on this entry-level version of the MSI Claw, while I will publish more detailed benchmarks once the faster Core Ultra 7 155H model arrives, and directly compare that with the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme over here, so make sure to subscribe so you're not gonna miss it.
PS, before we begin, the MSI Claw does not seem to have an option to choose the VRAM size yet, unless you use the advanced BIOS, which won't be a thing for the majority of users. So it's kinda on auto mode, I guess. First up, I was testing Forza Horizon 5 at 900p with medium settings. First using the extreme performance settings with the full fan speed, which results in around 55 to 60 degrees Celsius with a room temperature of around 21 degrees Celsius for the APU. And the FPS have been between 45 and 60 FPS, being quite playable, especially thanks to the smooth variable refresh rate display. In that scenario, the APU uses around 27 to 32 watt and the whole system draws around 45 to 50 watt. Switching to the super battery mode, the APU now only utilized 20 watt and the total system power goes down to around 32 watt, while the FPS often drop down into the high 30s and usually don't go higher than 45 FPS, while the frame times and 1% lows still seemed to be okay. For Cyberpunk 2077, I was first testing 1080p at low settings with XeSS on performance, using the Claw's extreme performance mode, which results in the APU pulling around 30 watt and the whole system a total of a whopping 50 to 55 watt. As you can see, the frame times aren't good and the game is actually quite stuttery. The FPS have been around 28 to 35 FPS most of the time. Changing to the super battery mode lowered the FPS to the mostly unplayable low 20s. I then switched to FSR performance, which didn't seem to help that much. And especially when driving in a car, the game really gets unplayable. Switching back to the extreme performance mode helps with the FPS, but the frame times and 1% lows are actually pretty bad. So I guess further reducing the resolution and using an FPS cap would be the only way to achieve playable results. For Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I was testing the game at 720p and medium settings. Using the extreme performance mode, the Claw uses around 30 watt for the APU, and that results in around 30 to 40 FPS in most scenes, which is still playable while not optimal, of course. I just don't like the game on the low settings, as it really starts to look kinda cheap. And I just realized I forgot to test this game on battery, sorry. The frame times seem to be mostly okay, though again not perfectly flat and fluid. For Fortnite, I was using a mix of low and high settings at the DirectX 12 mode at 1080p, with upscaling set to performance, rendering the game at around 60%. That resulted in FPS between around 45 to 60 FPS most of the time, with a few micro stutters here and there, while still being playable. Of course, using the game's performance mode is always an option for more sophisticated gaming. Though with the graphics setting I used, using the 20 watt mode generally would not be a good idea. Playing for 5 minutes used around 7 to 8% in my case of the battery life, meaning you would not get much more than an hour of gameplay though. So MSI really should try to improve the Claw on that front really soon.
Would I recommend getting an MSI Claw at this point? Obviously not. To be honest, not now and not in the future, because just the unusable RB and LB buttons make it an absolute no-go for me personally. Otherwise, there are admittedly some things that MSI has done right with the Claw. but considering the fact that it's more expensive than the ROG Ally, the Legion Go and let alone the Steam Deck, it's the opposite of a recommendation at this point. And I'm not even sure if they're going to fix these mushy buttons for future hardware updates. It's just horrible stuff. But if they add a 15-watt mode, which gets decent gaming performance while also drastically dropping the price, that could help a lot. Now, that's all for today. If you enjoyed the content, please leave a thumbs up to help me with the algorithm and prevent people from buying this handheld, at least for now. Sorry, MSI. Also consider becoming a channel member for only $1 per month to be mentioned at the end of my videos, as currently the only member doing that is this guy, and it's a penguin. Also again, please subscribe for more stuff like this in the future. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye and tschüss.